The biggest deal of the year for the Bruins was, of course, trading Brad Marchand to the Florida Panthers. And now he's in the conference final. And when he takes the ice in game 1 on Tuesday night, he will have secured a first-round draft pick for the Bruins. They also got a first-round pick for Brandon Carlo. Pretty good news from Don Sweeney. But I think the one thing that a lot of Bruins fans hung their hat on at the trade deadline was the fact that Marchand could come back, right? He's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. They didn't work out a deal in the time that he was actually here, but Brad wants to play here, kept his family here, didn't want to leave. Why not just bring him back after the season? At the time, it certainly made a lot of sense. But with kind of how this thing went down, I would be really hesitant to say Marchand is ready to hitch his wagon and come back to the Bruins. I don't think this thing ended very well. And with his production in the playoffs, he just led the series against the Leafs in points, led all skaters, 8 points in the series and 3 points in game 7. And had an overtime winner in there in game 3 and has willed his team to the conference final. I say that to say there are going to be plenty of suitors for Brad Marchand, okay? Even though he just turned 37, there's going to be no shortage of teams that are looking to add Brad Marchand to their team. Especially when you look at, Sam Bennett is younger and he does a lot of the same things, but Marchand is still productive and he's going to cost less than Sam Bennett. And there are 2 teams within the Bruins division, maybe even 3, that should take a good, long, hard look at Brad Marchand. I think the least likely, Ottawa, young team, playoff team, looking for some veteran experience. They kind of already have that in Claude Giroux, especially if they decide to keep him. But Brad Marchand could fill that hole as well. How about the Toronto Maple Leafs? They're sick of being victimized by this guy. He's got the most playoff points ever against the Leafs outside of Gordie Howe. He just crushed them again. He's 5-0 against them in playoff series. And you look at kind of the secondary scoring that Toronto didn't have in that series. I mean, to be fair, they didn't have primary scoring either. And a guy who invaluable to a team like the Leafs, to a guy who's actually done this. He's lifted the Stanley Cup. He's been in 3 finals. He might be on his way to a 4th right here. He's played in 2 great culture systems with the Bruins, with the Bergeron and Chara years, and of course, with the Panthers right now. The Leafs need experience and they need a little bit of nasty. If you can't beat him, why not bring him aboard, right? Wouldn't stun me if the Leafs go out and get Brad Marchand. But this other team, I think, is actually a little bit more likely. And it's just as crazy, just as vulgar and as vomit-inducing for Bruins fans. How about the Montreal Canadiens? Former Bruins villain Maxime Lapierre said on his show the other day, why not Montreal? Why doesn't that fit really well for Brad Marchand? Right? They need some depth, mainly at the center position, but they could use a winger who could play both special teams still, play on the power play, kill penalties. Veteran presence for a very young team with Montreal, very young, very talented. They're going to be a playoff team for years and years to come. They're going to be a staple in the postseason. And you know what else they saw? They saw in that first round series against the Washington Capitals just how much a series can turn when you've got a guy on the other side with a bit of an edge. They got freight trained literally and figuratively by Tom Wilson in that series, in that game 4. It was a close game. I want to say it was a tie game. Maybe they were down 1, third period. Tom Wilson, absolute freight train hit, and it leads to a Capitals goal. They win game 4. They take it easily in game 5. Montreal had talent. They worked hard. They were fast, but they didn't have that muscle. They didn't have that edge, and they didn't have guys who had been there before. Washington kind of did. Brad Marchand has been there before. It's his 4th conference finals that he's played in, and potentially the 4th Stanley Cup final if the Panthers take care of business in the series against Carolina. He has his name on the Stanley Cup. He's going to the Hall of Fame. Montreal could really use a guy like Brad Marchand. They could use a guy like Sam Bennett too. He fits a lot of those same holes. Not a Hall of Famer, obviously, but certainly brings in some muscle, some edge, some rat-like tendencies. But Brad Marchand, unfortunately, would be a perfect fit with Montreal. Perfect. For a team that is ready to seriously contend. They're ready to, like they did the year of being like the upstart young team that people could get behind and have a fun little first round. I think with that young core, they're looking at contending next year, competing for a division title with, some star players leaving the Leafs. Who knows with Tampa and Florida with their age and their free agents. Boston, not much of a problem at all right now. Ottawa, a bit of a problem, but actually shouldn't be as good long-term as Montreal is. So you bring in a guy like Brad Marchand, all of a sudden you've got that veteran presence. Now, the thing with Montreal that's weird, they only have about $8.5 million of cap space right now because they have a guy on their books who's taking up over a $10 million cap hit every year. But if they put this guy on the long-term IR, which is legal under the NHL rules, then they would open that cap space to about $19 million and really have the opportunity to go after a guy like Marchand and somebody else to help fill their needs. All they need to do is put their highest paid player on long-term IR. And I don't think Carey Price is playing a game this year anyway. Yes, they're still paying Carey Price $10.5 million on the cap hit. So if they put him on long-term IR, they got all kinds of options. And boy, howdy, what would that do for this rivalry if Brad Marchand is in a Canadiens sweater to potentially end his career? Boston Bruins icon. That doesn't happen. That does not happen. I actually can't think of one in history that was an iconic Bruins player. Like we're talking about Hall of Famer going to have his number in the rafters at the Garden, who ended up playing for Montreal. Funnily enough, I think there's one guy. Who has his number in the rafters at the Garden, who signed with the Canadiens at one point. And I think that was Willie O'Ree. But nobody else, man. Nobody else. Bobby Orr played for the Blackhawks. He didn't play for the Habs, right? These guys at the end of their career. Chara goes to Washington and Long Island. Didn't go to Montreal. Didn't go to Toronto. And here, both those teams should be in on Marchand. They absolutely should be. Is there a chance that the Bruins will re-sign him? Sure. But they've got competition. And as much as you hate to say it, like we got to laugh at the Leafs for a day before the Bruins just stuck our head in the mud with the Don Sweeney thing. But Toronto and Montreal are better options in terms of, being able to win in the near future. Win now kind of scenarios. Marchand's 37. Especially if he doesn't win the Cup with Florida this year. Like he's looking for win now. And the Bruins do not offer that in any sense. If a lot of things go right for the Bruins, especially in free agency, they can maybe make the playoffs next year. But you need to add a lot in free agency. And Brad Marchand was already looking for $7 million a year in his extension last year. And look what he's doing in the postseason. He might get even more than that. Bruins can't afford to do that if you're looking to rebuild. You're not buying a 37-year-old for a rebuild. I think there's a more likely chance. I think it's more likely that Brad Marchand is suiting up for the Montreal Canadiens or the Toronto Maple Leafs next year than it is for him to be suiting up for the Boston Bruins. And that's a scary thought. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Is Brad Marchand coming back to Boston? Does Boston want him back? Does he want Boston back? Or is he going to be playing for the Habs or the Leafs? Oh, God. And how bad a look would that be for the Bruins? Let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We're bringing you nothing but Boston sports content 5 days a week, live on YouTube, talking a lot of Bruins, and then wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Cam Stuart. Zach Burke keeps us on the air. Check out the other videos going out on YouTube, talking Bruins and everything Boston sports that we bring to you every weekday. This has been, and it will be tomorrow, which we will see you then, The Cam Show.